The release of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything gifted us with two of the most powerful sorcerer subclasses in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Today, we'll be diving deep into the Far Realm to discuss one of those two subclasses. Welcome to the Twisted Tentacle Inn. I'm your innkeeper, and today we'll be talking about the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer. I want to take a quick moment and give a huge thank you to all of my patrons for all the support. I know this has been a rough month for my content. I haven't put out a whole lot. This is my 5th attempt at this video. I've recorded it 4 times prior to this one, and I haven't been happy with any of the results. Hopefully this one works out and I can put this one out. I guess we will know if this one goes up, then this is the one that made it. And if you like this video and you like my content, please click the like button and also subscribe to the channel. That'll go a long way to helping us out. Thank you guys very much. This video is actually a part of a series of videos for the Sorcerer subclass. If you haven't seen any of those, please check them out. I'll link them in the video description. I highly recommend that you check out my intro to the Sorcerer class video, as well as the Meta Magic options video. I'm not going to be discussing spells in this video other than the ones that are exclusively available to the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer. And this is because I discuss every single Sorcerer spell as it applies to the Sorcerer class in other videos within the series, so check those out in the link in the description. With all that said, let's go ahead and get started with the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer. So at level 1, you get an extra cantrip with Mind Sliver. The sorcerers already get a ton of cantrips to begin with, so getting an extra one just gives you even more options. And what I recommend is to just spread them out so that you can be more utility in terms of your spell casting with your cantrips. You can use Mind Sliver as your primary combat tactic because as an Aberrant Mind Sorcerer, more than likely you're not going to be a blaster. Of course, you can always build yourself as a blaster, but I recommend doing a more utility build for the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer, and therefore use Mind Sliver as one of your primary combat tactics. Depend on your allies to do the actual damage in combat, and you can diversify your cantrips to be more utilitarian. Now, with that said, I still recommend you get an attack cantrip that actually deals a little bit more damage, just in case you need to up the damage out during a particularly difficult combat. So for those, I'd recommend either Firebolt or Chill Touch. Both are good options. Firebolt has a utility side that lets you ignite things that aren't creatures, and Chill Touch lets you damage creatures and prevent regeneration, which could be really big at later levels. So which cantrips do I recommend as your utility cantrips? Well, there are quite a few that I would say. So Minor Illusion is always a great choice. Control Flames can double the visibility of your allies that don't have dark vision. That's always going to be good, especially if you have Torchlight. You can double the range of that. And Mold Earth can be a great cantrip for both defense and utility. Pick the ones that would round out your character the best and move on from there. If you want a little bit more insight on the cantrips that are available to sorcerers, check out my Sorcerer Cantrips video, which again will be listed in the video description. At level 1, you also get an ability called Telepathic Speech. Telepathic Speech is a good ability. It has some really weird limitations, but even despite that, I think it's still very useful. So basically, you can connect telepathically with a creature within 30 feet. You can speak with each other for up to several miles, but you do have to speak the same language in order to communicate, which does limit this one a little bit, unfortunately. I play an Aberrant Mind Sorcerer character who swapped out one of my psionic spells for Comprehend Languages, and it really helps improve the benefits of this ability tremendously. Now, with this ability, at most you have 20 minutes of telepathic connection, and that's at level 20. It's not a whole lot, but as long as you're nearby, you can just use it again and reconnect with the person and talk to them again. The issue I have with this is that if you wanted to send a rogue or a summoned creature out to spy ahead, you're going to lose the connection before they can get to any significant distance. So it is an unfortunate limitation that prevents this from being more of an exploration type of feature and more of a quick utility type of thing in the middle of a conversation with NPCs, a parlay, that type of thing. Now, one thing that I do like about this ability is that it'll allow you to use Subtle Spell on certain spells that normally wouldn't work with that ability. Certain spells that require you to utter a sentence. For example, some Dungeon Masters rule that Subtle Spell is not going to work with this spell Suggestion, because Suggestion, part of the casting, requires you to utter your suggestion to the person. And regardless of whether you use Subtle Spell on Suggestion, some Dungeon Masters, because the wording in the spell says that you have to say the phrase, you won't be able to utter that phrase to someone for your suggestion. With Telepathic Speech, you would be able to do that because you're still giving them that suggestion. Even though it's not verbal, you are implanting it in their mind through telepathic communication, which as a DM, that's how I would rule that. But not just that, this ability also is very useful in other situations. For example, if you're bound and gagged, you can still communicate with your allies. If you're separated or far away with your allies, maybe underwater or in a plane where there's silence or an area where there's silence, you'll still be able to communicate with your allies telepathically using this ability. So there are plenty of utility functions, and I think that you will get some use out of this one. Also at level 1, you get some bonus spells, and in fact, you continue to get bonus spells all the way up to spell level 5. And by level 10, you'll know twice as many spells as most sorcerers will know, which is a huge benefit. One of the biggest limitations for the sorcerer class is the limited amount of spells that they know, so they have to be very careful with their spell selection. With this subclass, you get so many spells. In fact, you'll know more spells than most other spellcasting subclasses. So you'll have plenty of spells available to cast in many, many different situations, making you extremely versatile. The only other subclass that has the same amount of known spells is the Clockwork Soul Sorcerer, which is also found in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. But this subclass actually does it a little bit better, and I'll explain why in just a moment. And another great thing is that these extra spells that you get, you're not just locked into them. You can replace them. Every time that you level up, you can replace one with a spell from the Divination or Enchantment spell schools, and you can do so not just within the sorcerer spell list, but within the spell list of other classes such as the wizard and the warlock. That is really awesome, and as we get more source books and more spells are added to different spell lists, that ability strength is going to increase as well with the number of spells that are available to you. This extra spells feature is so good, but more importantly, you get access to a summoning spell, which very few sorcerer subclasses get access to. We're going to talk about the benefits of the summoning spells in just a moment, but just know that summoning spells are one of the best ways to boost your action economy and are often overlooked in the game, but are secretly some of the most powerful spells in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Then at 6th level, you get 2 abilities. The first one is called Psionic Sorcery, and this is what makes this subclass's spellcasting the best of any sorcerer out there in the game, bar none. Even the Clockwork Soul doesn't come close to this. Every bonus spell that you gain from your psionic spells can be used and cast using sorcery points. But the difference between this and the flexible casting that sorcerers normally get is that this is an even trade for sorcery points. So a 2nd level spell from your psionic sorcery is only going to cost you 2 sorcery points. A normal sorcerer would pay 3 sorcery points to cast a 2nd level spell. That makes it tremendous. And not just that, but the spells that you cast using your psionic sorcery, using sorcery points, are cast basically as subtle spells, not requiring any components at all, including material components that cost gold. Whereas subtle spell in general, if you use that meta magic, you still have to provide the costly ingredients for a spell that costs money. For example, summon Aberration, you need a 400 gold piece item in order to be able to cast that spell. Well, with this Psionic Sorcery ability, if you cast it using sorcery points, you're not going to require that. This ability lets you be super powerful during parleys or negotiations and before combat ensues, to maybe even end the combat before it starts. You can cast some enchantment spells, charm creatures, or be able to calm them down before an interaction to ensure that the interaction goes favorably for your group. And no one will even notice that you're casting these spells on them because you're casting it with no components whatsoever. Now, one thing that's important to know is that you can't have more sorcery points than your current caster levels. So if you're a 6th level sorcerer, you can't have more than 6 sorcery points at any given time. This kind of limits the ability a little bit, but you can convert spell slots into sorcery points as a bonus action. So it's not tremendously limiting, although just know that it's there, because that is something that has come up in my games where I've had to wait around in order to be able to convert some points into sorcery points enough to cast a spell that I wanted to cast. But regardless of that, think about this. Every spell slot that you convert gets you sorcery points equal to the spell slot's level. So, for example, if you convert 3 3rd level spells to sorcery slots, you're going to get 9 sorcery points altogether. So it's an even trade. You can convert 3 3rd level spells into sorcery points and then cast 3 3rd level spells using Psionic Sorcery without any components needed. Simple enough. Now, the extra hidden benefit of this is that because those spells are so cheap, you can realistically get a bunch more castings of mid-level spells than other sorcerers. So if you have 4 level 1 spells, you can convert them to 1 4th level spell. For most sorcerers, converting 4 level 1 spells nets you a level 2 spell. So think about that. If you're a 6th level, you can convert 3 level 1 spells and 3 level 2 spells, and with those 9 sorcery points, plus the 6 that you already get for being at 6th level, you can cast an additional 5 3rd level spells at 6th level throughout your adventuring day. You can't do it all at once. Again, you can't bank those sorcery points. But think about that. That's a total of 7 level 3 spells per long rest at 6th level. No one even comes close to that. Now, this ability only works with the Psionic Sorcery spells that you're getting for free or that you've swapped out for those Psionic Sorcery spells. But that doesn't matter. There are some really good ones like Hunger of Hadar, or upcasting a Tasha's Mind Whip, or upcasting Hold Person. Check with your Dungeon Master though. I've heard some Dungeon Masters haven't allowed the swap spells to be used, and some Dungeon Masters haven't allowed people to upcast those psionic spells using sorcery points. Check with your Dungeon Master specifically if they're going to allow that. By my interpretation, rules as written and rules as intended, you should be able to upcast, say, Tasha's Mind Whip using 4 sorcery points to upcast it as a 4th level spell, but your Dungeon Master is the final arbiter of your table, so don't argue with them. If they don't want you to do that, then by all means, just do what they want you to do with that. So the Psionic Sorcery, I want to really harp in on this benefit and just how good it is. It makes you so much more flexible than a typical sorcerer. You are an adventurer at 6th level. You're going to convert a 2nd level spell and a 1st level spell into 3 sorcery points, and now you can cast an additional 3rd level spell for the day, and you can just keep doing that as your adventuring day goes on. And this gets even better once you can cast Summon Aberration, the 4th level spell. I mean, you're going to be able to cast that several times throughout the day and constantly have a pet with you that can tank hits and deal a significant amount of damage and can do other stuff for you. That's utility. We're going to get to the things that they can do in just a moment. But it doesn't just end there. At level 6, you also get an additional benefit. You have advantage against being charmed or frightened, which is huge for a sorcerer. This is overlooked again as just it's an okay feature. It's not. It's a fantastic feature for a sorcerer. Most sorcerers, they don't put points in their wisdom score. Therefore, they're really bad at wisdom saving throws. Frightened and charmed effects all target wisdom, or at least 90% of them are going to target your wisdom. So sorcerers in general are really, really vulnerable to these types of effects. Well, now you're going to get resistance to those saving throws. And in fact, you get an additional benefit where you are resistant to psychic damage, which may not come in very often, but when it comes in handy, it's going to be huge, because generally creatures that deal psychic damage deal a lot of psychic damage. Most creatures that deal psychic damage aren't doing 1 or 2 points of psychic damage per hit. They're doing a ton of psychic damage. So being resistant to that is a huge benefit as well. Then at 14th level, you get an ability called Revelation in Flesh. This one's also pretty good. At 1 sorcery point, it's a real bargain, to be honest. You'll probably never see this ability since most games aren't going to get to 14th level. But if you ever get to 14th level, you're going to have a great ability to use at that level. It takes 1 sorcery point for each effect that you choose from this ability, and it lasts for 10 minutes. There are several effects that you can pick from. The first effect is going to allow you to see any invisible creature within 60 feet of you. The only limitation is that it can be behind total cover, which does kind of suck, but it's still pretty good. The effect basically copies the effect of the See Invisibility spell. Well, sort of. You can't really see into the ethereal plane like you can with the second level See Invisibility spell, but honestly, that's not something that you're probably ever going to come in contact with. And if you need it one time, then, I mean, you're probably going to have bigger problems than that. Regardless, 1 sorcery point is still a bargain to copy a second level spell. The second effect that you can choose from is that you gain a flying speed equal to your walking speed, which also lets you hover. And that's really, really nice, to be honest. This is copying the effects of the 3rd level spell for 1 sorcery point, but it's actually even better than that. The 3rd level spell Fly grants you a flying speed, but it has a limitation that this ability doesn't. So first, the spell Fly requires concentration, which is a huge limitation. Not only can you drop and take some damage if you lose your concentration, but generally, you have a bunch of other spells that you want to be concentrating on, especially as an Aberrant Mind Sorcerer. So being able to duplicate the effects of that 3rd level spell without taking up your concentration is pretty awesome, and especially at 1 sorcery point. Second, this ability grants you hover, which the 3rd level spell Fly does not. So if you lose your concentration with Fly, you can be knocked down. With a hover speed, you aren't able to be knocked down and take damage from that, no matter how high you are. And finally, because this ability is not a spell, it's not going to be able to be countered or dispelled. And so anti-magic cone abilities like the Beholder's Central Eye ability or anti-magic fields aren't going to affect this. You'll still be able to fly even within those effects. This is a really awesome ability, to be honest. It's just too bad that you get it so late in your adventuring career. The next benefit that you can pick from is you can get a swimming speed equal to twice your walking speed, and you can breathe underwater. This is situational, but if you ever needed it, it's nice to have it. And it's also duplicating the effects of a 3rd level spell called Water Breathing for only 1 sorcery point. But again, this one is better than that spell. The spell Water Breathing doesn't give you a swim speed, it just lets you breathe underwater. So in a way, this is better. Although Water Breathing does let you target other creatures, whereas this one does not, it's still, I think in general, going to be a better choice than using a 3rd level spell slot. And the final benefit that you can pick from with this ability is that you become slimy and pliable, and you can go through narrow spaces and such, and you can escape from restraints and that kind of thing. Being able to go through 1-inch spaces has a variety of utility benefits, like getting past locked doors and grapples and things like that. This is pretty good, and it's a little less situational than the water benefit one, but at this level, I think that you can duplicate that pretty easily with many other features. I mean, it's still nice to have for 1 sorcery point, so not bad. Overall, I think that the 14th level benefits are mostly either good to great, and any additional way to use sorcery points and inexpensive ways to use sorcery points for really good benefits is really, really good in my book. And then your capstone ability at 18th level is called Warping Implosion. This one takes an action to use, and it lets you teleport up to 120 feet away. Then the creatures that are within 30 feet of where you teleported from have to make a strength saving throw, or they're going to take 3d10 force damage and then be moved to the center of where you teleported from. Presumably, they're going to be moved up to 30 feet towards the center, or up to whatever obstruction stops the movement. But the ability isn't really clear on that, so you're going to have to ask your Dungeon Master about how they want that to work if there's an obstruction in the way. If a creature succeeds their saving throw, they take half damage and they're not moved. You can use this once per long rest, but I do like that you can use 5 sorcery points if you wanted to use it again once you've used the ability. It's expensive at 5 sorcery points, but at least they give you the option should you need to use it again for whatever reason. This ability kind of reminds me of Thunderstep. It's a 3rd level spell. This one also moves creatures, which Thunderstep does not do. It's a nice addition in terms of battlefield control and mobility control. I honestly don't see too many people using 5 sorcery points to be able to use this ability, but if you really need it, at least the option is there. The ability overall, I think, is okay. The damage is super, super low for this level, but I'll take a free teleport any day. I don't like that it takes an action instead of a bonus action, and that it requires you to see the spot that you want to teleport to. At this level, I think that having a teleport that lets you teleport beyond an obstruction or a wall probably is going to not break the game. And I wish that they would have not put that stipulation that you have to see where you're teleporting to. Both of those limitations really affect the effectiveness of this ability. I still think it's fine, but, you know, I mean, I guess realistically, you're probably never going to see this ability because whoever plays till 18th level anyways. So I guess it doesn't really matter that it ain't super great. So those are the subclass abilities of the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer. Now let's go ahead and look at the bonus spells that you get with this subclass. Starting off with Mind Sliver. You get this one for free at first level, and it's one of the best cantrips in the game, to be honest. I've discussed this spell in the Sorcerer Cantrips video. It does a little bit of damage and has a great debuff attached to it. The target makes an intelligence saving throw, or they take a bit of damage, and then they have to subtract 1d4 from their next saving throw. The damage isn't great, so don't pick this one for the damage, but the debuff alone is worth it. Even if this spell didn't do any damage, I would still take it just for the debuff. The fact that it requires an intelligence saving throw makes it very likely that the enemy is going to fail, and very few creatures are good at intelligence saving throws. So this is a spell that you're probably going to be using quite a bit throughout your adventuring career. I would consider this spell for Quicken or Twin Spell on 2 enemies, let's say, and then hit the 2 enemies the following round with an upcast Tasha's Mind Whip or an upcast Hold Person or something like that. There are very few other cantrips that I would spend sorcery points on for meta magic, so that's saying a lot about this one. Arms of Hadar. This is not a good spell for a sorcerer at all. It only affects creatures within 10 feet of you, and they have to save or take some necrotic damage, and then they lose the ability to take reactions on their next turn. The damage of this spell is not great, and the strength saving throw isn't fantastic either. The secondary effect on it is very, very mediocre. Clearly, this spell is meant to be kind of like a getaway spell, and if you're surrounded by enemies, you cast this one to punish them for being so close, and then you can get away without taking attacks of opportunity. The range of this spell is so bad that pretty much it's only going to be useful in that kind of situation. And it's the only time that I would consider ever using this spell. And let's be honest, there's no way that you'd proactively put yourself in danger just so that you can cast this spell. The issue that I have with this one is the debuff is just not good enough to help you get away. If you use this spell, it means that you've just used an action to cast it, which means that you're only going to get your movement speed to move away. And sure, the enemies aren't going to react with an attack of opportunity, but on their next turn, they're just going to move right up to you because you couldn't dash because you used your action to cast a spell. If this spell was a bonus action, maybe I would consider it. But as it is right now, but one, as a sorcerer, you're not going to want to be that close to enemies. You're also not going to do that much of a debuff or do that much damage to them. They're going to come at you the following round and beat you down. So there is no real benefit to being that close to enemies. The only way that this spell is going to help you get away, honestly, is if you spend sorcery points to quicken it and then use your action to dash. And then maybe you'll be able to get away from those enemies. But, I mean, spending 2 sorcery points on this spell, not worth it at all unless you absolutely need to get away, which why would you even put yourself in that situation, right? So this is the first spell that I would replace. A good replacement here, I think, Comprehend Languages is super useful throughout your entire adventuring career. Even though you can't cast spells as a ritual, it's still a great utility spell that you can make even better with the extended spell meta magic or your telepathic speech ability. And let's say you still need a way to get away from enemies and you didn't want to replace it with Comprehend Languages. Well, replace it with something else anyways, and then just wait till 3rd level when you can cast 2nd level spells. Pick up Misty Step as a regular sorcerer spell, and then you'll be able to get away as a bonus action, teleporting, away with Misty Step and then using your action to dash away. Dissonant Whispers. This is a great spell that's only normally available to bards, and a couple of different warlock subclasses get it as a bonus, but as a spell list, only bards get this spell. It deals good damage and it forces your target to run, potentially provoking attacks of opportunity from your party members. The best part is that as a sorcerer, you can twin this for only 1 sorcery point, doubling the number of targets and making you a great controller right at the early levels. It can also serve a very similar function to Arms of Hadar, to be honest, but it works much better as an option to help you get away from enemies because they're going to be running from you, and then you can run in the opposite direction and get away. So this one is going to be a great combat option up until about level 9, but even beyond that, actually, it can probably stay pretty relevant. Calm Emotions. This is a very handy spell for social interaction. If things start to go sour in a parlay, let's say, or if you happen to anger a group of humanoids, then this spell can help avoid unnecessary combat. It also is a great way to remove debuffs against your allies that are very common throughout all levels of play, like fear. I've used this spell countless times in my Rime of the Frost Maiden game. I'm playing an Aberrant Mind Sorcerer, and I've used Calm Emotions endlessly to help avoid unnecessary combats and keep our resources fresh for the really important combats, and it's been really, really helpful. So I highly recommend that you keep this spell once you are able to get it. So basically how this spell works is that you cast it on a group within 60 feet, and all creatures within a 20-foot radius have to make a charisma save or they're going to be affected. And there are 2 effects that you can pick from. You can only pick one effect when you cast it. So you can't pick one effect for a group and another effect for another. Per casting, you get to pick one of the 2 effects. The first effect is that you can turn hostile humanoids indifferent. This can end a fight in a peaceful way. They become indifferent to you. They're not your allies, but they're also not your enemies anymore. It can turn a social interaction that's gone wrong back into a civilized conversation so you can end it amicably. This one can come up more times than you actually think it can. The other effect that you can pick is to end charm or fear effects on your allies. Both are very common debuffs for your party, and from level 1 through level 20, these are 2 effects that your frontliners really can't stand, especially barbarians. Barbarians hate the fear effect. It is terrible for them. So being able to use this on them and fighters to a certain degree and remove the fear effects or even charm effects is going to be something that's going to be impactful from level 1 all the way through level 20. And your allies will be grateful for it. Detect Thoughts. This one is a good spell for social interaction. Basically, it can help you tremendously when trying to determine the intentions of creatures that you're interacting with. As a sorcerer, with this spell, you can pull off some really cool things. Like you can use Twin Spell to read the surface thought of 2 creatures for the cost of 1 casting. But overall, I think this one is a good target for replacement if you wanted to replace one of your 2nd level Psionic Sorcery spells. I say this because Tasha's Mind Whip is such a good spell, and even though you can take it as a regular sorcerer spell, you will benefit tremendously from picking Tasha's Mind Whip as one of your Psionic Sorcery spells. Of course, you can always replace Calm Emotions with Tasha's Mind Whip if you really, really wanted to keep this spell. But I think Calm Emotions is a universally more useful spell than this one. But, you know, it's up to you. Whichever one you go with, you're not going to go wrong either way. Tasha's Mind Whip is an awesome spell, and I think that one of the 2 that you get for this level should be replaced with Tasha's Mind Whip if you really want to be effective in combat with your Aberrant Mind Sorcerer. And I say this because once you have Tasha's Mind Whip as a Psionic Sorcery spell, you're going to be able to use sorcery points to cast it on the cheap and therefore get a lot more castings of it per adventuring day than you would if you just pick it up as a normal sorcerer spell. So definitely highly recommend that you take Tasha's Mind Whip as one of your Psionic Sorcery spells. Hunger of Hadar. This one is a great control spell, but if your dungeon master doesn't understand what's happening with this one, then they might unknowingly nerf it and basically make this one kind of a dud of a spell. I'm not going to go too deep into what can go wrong here, but just know that I have played in games where the Dungeon Master has creatures immediately run to the borders of the edges of the spell area of effect, making it basically an effect that's only going to affect the creatures for 1 round. So here's the way I see it. If a creature is in complete blackness and tentacles are rubbing up on them and from all sides and all this stuff, then there's no reason for those creatures to know where the edges of this spell are because it's complete blackness. They're blind. They don't know that 10 feet away from them is the edge and they can run that way. In my opinion, if a creature is going to panic and try to run out of this area of effect, if they even know that there is an area of effect and they don't think they were teleported to some other plane, then they would run in any random direction, or maybe the direction they were originally running in order to try and get out of it. But why would they go instantly know where the closest edge of it is? They wouldn't. But some dungeon masters have done this. In my particular experience, I've had this happen on a couple of occasions, and it really doesn't feel good when you spend a 3rd level spell slot for a spell like this one, like Hunger of Hadar, and creatures get out of the area of effect within half a round, because you cast it and then on their turn they're going to use their action to move away, and then that's it, they're out of it. That's not fun. So talk with your dungeon master. If that's how they're going to play it, then just don't even bother casting this one, or consider replacing this spell, because this can be a very powerful spell if your dungeon master plays ball. But kind of like illusions, this one requires dungeon master buy-in in order for it to actually work really, really well. I did make a video on this spell and how awesome it can be, so check it out if you're interested. But again, even with all the stuff I talked about in that video, if your dungeon master isn't playing ball, you're not really going to enjoy casting that spell at all. Sending. This one's a good utility spell. It has some uses for exploration. It's just too bad that it doesn't offer two-way communication and that the message is limited to 25 words. Regardless, I've used this spell myself and I've seen it used and done to good effect, so overall it's still pretty useful regardless. The basic function is that you can send a short message of up to 25 words to a creature that you're familiar with, and they know that it's you if they know who you are, and only they hear it, which is really cool, and they hear it in their mind, so it's not like an audible thing. The range is the really big selling point on this one, because you can send a message across planes if you ever needed to do that. Of course, it's probably never going to come up to do that, but it's nice that it's there if you do need it. The spell is definitely circumstantial, especially since it's a 3rd level slot, but because you get it for free, actually it's totally fine if you decide to keep it in your repertoire and you only have to use it once in a blue moon. Next up is Evard's Black Tentacles. This one is a great control spell that deals a little bit of damage. I've made a video about this spell as well, so check it out and I'll link it below. Basically, you affect a 20-foot square within a 90-foot range, and you create like these tentacles that grapple people and deal damage to them every round, and they have to make a saving throw or they can remain grappled. It's great because it slows them down. It's not only difficult terrain, but if they lose their saving throw or they fail their saving throw, they're going to be grappled on top of that. So it can really, really slow down some enemies, especially those that are not good with strength or dexterity saves. I really like this spell. As a control spell, I think it's pretty awesome. Summon Aberration. The Sorcerer spell list has a major hole when it comes to some other arcane casters, and that hole is the lack of summoning spells. Summoning spells are amazing for action economy and utility outside of combat. Luckily, the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer gets a pretty good summoning spell with the Summon Aberration spell. This one lets you summon a powerful creature, and you have a choice from 3 different ones that once you cast it that you can bring onto the battlefield. So let's look at each option. So first up is the Beholderkin. This one is a great ranged attack option. I recommend using this option if your party has melee covered. If you have a couple of melee combatants and you just need a little bit more power from range, this one has a great range of 150 feet. The damage is kind of mediocre, 1d8 plus 3 plus the spell's level. It's not a whole lot, but it's an average of 11, and it's psychic damage, which is very rarely resisted. And they do get 2 attacks per round, which does make this a little bit better. So pretty good, not insignificant at all. And if you need a scout that can fly, this one can have you covered in that instance. Unfortunately, the Beholderkin doesn't have limbs, so it's not going to be able to help with other utility functions, but the fly speed is a definite plus here. Slaadi. This is the option that you're going to want if you need something to take hits in combat. The regeneration ability of this creature is really, really powerful, and this thing can take hits round after round, and it can absorb damage that normally would be aimed at your allies. The summon deals the least amount of damage, mostly because it's a non-magical slashing attack. On paper, it looks like the most damage, but because it's non-magical, slashing Most creatures you're going to be fighting at this level are going to be resistant to that. So you're actually going to be dealing less than the Beholderkin or the Star Spawn on a round. So again, this one does D10 die of damage. It's a little bit higher than the other two options, but it's honestly not enough to make up for the fact that the damage type that it deals is generally highly resisted, and you're going to be facing quite a bit of those at these levels. The only exception where this thing can actually deal even more damage than the other options is if you're fighting creatures that regenerate. This Slaadi prevents a creature from regenerating hit points or gaining hit points from any way, not just regeneration, even healing potions or magical healing. They're not able to regain hit points when the Slaadi hits them with an attack. So this one can actually be very, very effective against creatures that regenerate, like vampires and such. And of course, the Slaadi does have limbs with opposable thumbs, which is really handy for utility functions. So this creature can hand healing potions to your allies. It can help carry loads of stuff that your party wouldn't be able to carry and all that kind of stuff. It can even open doors or set off traps for you if you wanted to. It'll take the hit and then just regenerate it back. So very, very helpful for exploration. If you want to explore and you don't need a flying creature, this is the option for you. And then in combat, if you're facing creatures that are resistant to its attacks, you can still have it carry fallen allies out of the melee, or you can just have it sit there and tank the hit so that it can trigger attacks of opportunity or just take normal attacks so that it can allow your allies to safely get away. Since it regenerates, the damage that it takes is insignificant unless it happens to go down and die that round. But if it takes a bunch of damage and it's not enough to kill it by the end of the combat, it doesn't matter. It's going to get it all back very, very quickly anyways. Whatever you do when you're using this creature in combat, do not have it stand there and take the dodge action. It's tempting because you think, oh, it's a tank, it regenerates, and if I dodge, I can avoid hits on top of that. Don't do that. If you dodge, any DM worth their salt is going to have the creatures say, no, this guy's too hard to hit, and they'll aim their attacks at your party members. And that's not what you want. You want to take the hits with this creature because it regenerates. You want to make sure that other creatures are hitting it, and that way they're incentivized to hit it some more so that they don't focus their attacks on your allies. They keep focusing on it. So whatever you do, do not use the dodge action. Keep attacking even if you're not dealing that much damage with your claws. The final option that you get is the Star Spawn. This is probably your best option for dealing damage in melee. The tricky part with this one is to make sure that you position it in a way where your allies are not going to end up within 5 feet of it, because if they do and it starts its turn within 5 feet of them, they're going to be subject to its psychic pulse attack. So you do not want your allies to be taking hits from your creature because that would just be bad. It shouldn't be too hard to position your party that way, but it's something that you should probably keep in mind. Dealing 1d8 plus 3 plus the spell level damage with 2 attacks plus 2d psychic damage at the beginning of its turn, it's really going to impact the battlefield, especially if you can nail more than one enemy with the 2d6 damage aura. And you can focus fire with Dissonant Whispers, let's say, dealing more damage and providing an attack of opportunity if necessary. I think most of the time, you're probably going to want to do the Star Spawn. So this is the one that you're going to want to summon the most frequently. Utility-wise, I think the Beholderkin, if you want to explore, and don't need flying, then go ahead and summon the Slaadi. But for combat purposes, I think the Star Spawn is going to be the way to go. And then for 5th level spells, you get Rary's Telepathic Bond. This one is a handy spell. It allows you to create a telepathic connection between 8 people. I love this spell. It's 5th level, so it's very costly, but man, is it awesome. I've used it so many times in my Rime of the Frost Maiden campaign, having your allies being able to communicate without having to worry about talking out loud and giving away their positions and all that, having someone scout ahead and still be able to speak telepathically. It is super, super awesome. A spell that I honestly, when I first saw it, didn't think it was that big a deal, but now realize just how powerful it can be. It's great for utility, it's great for social interaction, and you can discuss options during a parlay without the people you're parlaying with knowing even that you're communicating. It's amazing. It's great for moving quietly while infiltrating a place or, in a dungeon or whatever, so that you can relay information without having to worry about giving away your position. The other 5th level spell you get is another really good one. It's called Telekinesis, and this one is a really powerful spell that can be useful for every aspect of the game, including combat, utility, and exploration, as well as social interaction. You can control an enemy creature by holding them in place, and they can't move, or you can push them back. Now, I would check with your Dungeon Master to see if they'll allow you to twin this spell, because if they do, then you can do some really cool things with it, but I know a lot of Dungeon Masters won't allow a twinning of this one because of the wording of the spell. You can use this spell on your allies. You can move them up to an unreachable area, or you can move them closer to an enemy if they've run out of movement speed. Outside of combat, you can move obstructions out of the way, or move obstructions in to block a path from enemies that are chasing you, that kind of stuff. You can do a number of cool things. Both of the spells that you get at 5th level are really, really good. It's just too bad because there's one 5th level spell that I highly recommend that you take, which means that you're going to have to replace one of these, unfortunately. And that spell is Synaptic Static. That spell is a spell you're definitely going to want as one of your psionic spells. I know it's already on the sorcerer spell list, and you can take it as a normal sorcerer spell, but taking it as a psionic spell allows you to use sorcery points to cast it on the cheap and get more castings per day. My recommendation is pick the spell that you like the most out of the 2 free spells that you get, and then replace the one that you like the least with Synaptic Static. You're not going to regret it, trust me. With that said, both spells are really good, so even if you don't get Synaptic Static and you want to go a more utility route, you're okay keeping both spells. I think they're both still really good. But if you want to be effective in combat at the higher levels and have a really bomb combat option, Synaptic Static cannot be beat as a blast spell. The Aberrant Mind Sorcerer clearly has a ton of utility options, and with so much good stuff that you're not going to have a lot of room to be a proper blaster. I recommend that you diversify your spells and embrace what the subclass wants you to do, which is to be a very well-rounded spellcaster for utility, exploration, and combat. For level 1 through 3, I think it's a good idea to focus on battlefield control and utility, and use Dissonant Whispers and Mind Sliver as your damage options and combat options, with a few sprinkling of whatever other cantrip that you selected. At level 4, you probably want to swap out your Psionic Sorcery spells for Tasha's Mind Whip. At this point, you're probably going to want to really leverage that spell in combat, but when you run out of 2nd level spells, you can always fall back on Dissonant Whispers and Mind Sliver if you need to. Once you hit level 6, everything changes because now you can use sorcery points for your psionic spells, and you're going to want to keep your sorcery points topped off as much as possible so that you can take advantage of using them to cast spells without components. If your Dungeon Master allows it, you can upcast Mind Whip to level 3 using only 3 sorcery points and target 2 creatures every time that you cast it, or you can convert higher level spells to cast countless Dissonant Whispers in combat while concentrating on your control spells. At level 7, you can summon Aberration, and now you can actually begin dealing some really good damage in combat that's going to be relevant to what everyone else is doing in the party. Now remember, if you need something that needs to take hits, summon the Slaadi. If you need good range damage, summon the Beholderkin, and if you want really good melee damage, pick the Star Spawn. Regardless, at level 7 and onward, I recommend using your concentration almost exclusively for the Summon Aberration spell. With the sorcery point conversion, there should never be a reason you don't have the resources to have one at your side at all times. Then in combat, you can support your group by dealing cantrip damage or blasting away and controlling the battlefield with either Dissonant Whispers or Tasha's Mind Whip. And then at 10th level, you can replace a spell and take Synaptic Static. From this point forward, with your Aberrant Spirit and Synaptic Static, you're going to be debuffing, damaging, and controlling your foes like no other party member can in combat. And one of the most important party members outside of combat with your utility and social interaction spells. Generally, I think that sorcerers should not pick circumstantial spells because they have such a limited amount of spells that they know per day that you just can't afford to have a very circumstantial spell taking up one of those limited slots and a spell that you may not cast but once every few sessions. This is completely the opposite with the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer. I think you get so many known spells per day that as an Aberrant Mind Sorcerer, you have the option to pick some more circumstantial spells and have them sit there. It's not going to affect you that much. kind of like how Warlocks work. Warlocks have only 2 spells for most of their casting career, 2 spell slots that they can use on their spells, but they have a bunch of spells that they can pick from. So they're definitely able to have some circumstantial spells, because you're not going to have the option to cast every single spell in your spells known list throughout an adventuring day. Well, the same applies with the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer. You can pick some circumstantial spells because you have so many known spells that a circumstantial spell can just sit there and it's not going to affect you tremendously. I think the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer works best as a utility and a control caster. The mere fact that they get extra known spells puts them above the norm of sorcerers, but the fact that they can cast those bonus spells on the cheap is a tremendous advantage that I cannot overstate. This can make them almost as versatile as a wizard. I mean, I think they're right there with the wizard in terms of versatility, and you can be a pretty good Swiss Army knife for your party. And you'll still excel at control, more so than a wizard, because you can pick character options that support that role, and you're better at concentration checks. You can convert spells into sorcery points and convert them for higher or level lower spells at a reduced cost. And it's a really powerful ability. It helps make the Aberrant Mind probably the most versatile caster in terms of number of spells that you can cast per day, and that's of all spellcasting classes. Because one adventuring day you may want to cast 7 level 4 spells in one day, and the next adventuring day you may want to cast 30 level 1 spells in one day. And as an Aberrant Mind Sorcerer, you totally have the ability to do that. No other spellcaster has that option. So as just to give one more example of how that works, at level 9 you can literally summon Aberration 10 times in a day if you wanted to. You can cast Dissonant Whispers 40 times in a day before a long rest. Or you can use Tasha's Mind Whip over 20 times in an adventuring day before a long rest. Or maybe you need Telekinesis to move things around. You can potentially cast that 9 times before a long rest. That is amazing. The Psionic Sorcery spellcasting ability is, in my opinion, the strongest ability that any sorcerer gets in the game, bar none. Not only that, but they get a suite of great abilities and spells that help you excel in combat, utility, and social aspects of the game as well. You get some great defensive abilities and a pretty good social interaction ability with that telepathic bond. All of this adds up to a solid package that sits at the very top of the sorcerer subclass list. So, all that said, what are your thoughts on the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer? Do you agree with me? Do you have any insights on anything that I might have missed? Please let me know in the comments down below. Down there. As always, I am your innkeeper from the Twisted Tentacle Inn. Check in anytime. I'll talk with you then. And because it's an even trade, those same 9 points can let you cast 3 third level spells using Psionic Sorcery. So it would be an even trade. You convert 3 third... Loki. Alright. For most sorcerers, converting 4 level...